So I'm Jim Allison. I'm the president of CCI Vancouver, and we're delighted to be hosting our second webinar, New Technology. Our genius who helps us with technology, unfortunately, wasn't available today at the last minute. So we, as volunteers, have found other people to help. So we may bumble a bit, but I'm sure you'll enjoy the presentation. So CCI Vancouver is the only national organization for condominium managers and clients. We use the term Strata here, but in the rest of Canada, of course, it is condominium. And as a national organization, we have 17 chapters across Canada, and we network a lot with them and talk about things that are successful for them, what kind of seminars are people enjoying, etc. So we're going to move forward. I'll turn my phone off with this, and I'm going to turn this over to Sean Ingraham from First Service Residential, and we'll move forward. So thanks again for attending.
Thanks, Jim. And everybody online, we can thank Jim. He's the president of CCI and he does a ton. I'm the vice president and it's the best position. So if you're on council, you want to be vice president because you get a little bit of the glory, but none of the work the president gets. So it's always the best. And the treasurer, that's a lot of work. So we want to avoid that one for sure. But anyway, thank you everybody for coming. Really important topic that's getting a lot of conversation is electric cars. Turns out there's more than 2 of them. And there is just getting more and more out there. And so we get lots of questions on what did we do for the infrastructure? How do we support our owners and our residents that want to have electric cars? So we've got 3 experts here. We actually got a bonus 4th coming and that are going to help us navigate and get some base knowledge so that we can have a plan of action as council members on how we support our building and our community as there's a great shift over to electric vehicles. First up, we got Michael Rynch. He is with Hedgehog Technologies. He is a self-proclaimed EV electrical nerd. He's got a PhD and he has been in the industry for 30 years working on like smart meters, batteries, and things like that. And so we're very excited to have him here. We've also got Rico Grippo from Lux Electric. They're electric installer. They're electricians that operate in Metro Vancouver. Fairly long experience, and Rico is one of the main people there as far as ownership. And then if you've attended other CCI events, I'm sure you've seen Lisa Frey. Lisa Frey is from Lawson Lundell, very experienced lawyer, over a decade in the industry and kind of a go-to when there's strata law. And so she's going to be helping us on the legal end of it. So quick run through tonight. What we're going to be doing is we're going to have our presenters. They're going to give us some knowledge, and then we're going to take a break or 2 through just to see if there's any major questions. So if there is a question, you can put it in the chat below. And if it's a question that comes up more than once, Jim is going to call us out at the break, and we're going to turn it over to the experts partway through. If it's just a one-off question, what we're going to do is we're going to wait till the end and we're going to ask those general questions at the end. If we get tons of questions, what we'll do is we'll record all the questions, have our industry experts answer them, and then we'll email it out to anyone attending if we get a large amount of questions that we can't get to tonight. So with that, the audio is muted. And please do the Q&A panel down below and you can answer questions. Jim is manning that tonight, which is thanks, Jim, for doing that. And we've also got Max out there and they're going to be kind of the support network in the background while I do the easy job and introduce the speakers and hand it over to them. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Michael, who's going to get into the engineering and the concept and analyzing before everything starts getting going. So Michael, over to you.
Okay, thanks. And can you hear me okay, Sean?
Yeah, you sound good.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and it's myself here with Lux Electric. I'm the owner of Hedgehog Technologies and spent the last 20, 30 years in smart grid technology and EV infrastructure upgrades is of course a big thing now. And we work very closely with Lux Electric, who are a premier electrical services company, and they specialize in the installation of LED infrastructure upgrades and charging infrastructure. So we work very closely, and you need us both to get the job done, us or another type of group. of people. Is that right? Rico covered?
Yes, I think it's important to have us both there.
Great. Okay, next slide. So this is just, I think we're preaching to the choir here, but just an interesting stat that I found, stats I found the last couple of days is, first thing is electric vehicle sales have increased year over year by 40%. Really I think the only thing that may have matched that is the cost of Vancouver housing. But other than that, it's pretty much a exponential curve. The other thing that's quite fascinating is Tesla, the one of the electric car companies out there, the biggest one. It is worth as much as the next 6 biggest car companies combined. So it's fair to say that electric vehicles are here to stay. Next slide, please. And once again, this is probably something you're all aware of, but there's advantages to upgrading your Strata units to support electric vehicles. And when I talk about upgrading your Strata to electric vehicles, I've seen some of the questions come in, and I want to say that because electric cars are here to stay, I think it's in your, and this is just an opinion here, I don't have any affiliation with charging companies or anything like that, but it is in your best interest to upgrade your entire parking garage, if you can, if you have capacity, to support as many of the unit holders as possible. Rico, what do you think?
I agree. Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, it's the way it's going. To have the EV ready plan, it's something that you kind of have to have anyways to get all the proper incentives and rebates. It's the best way to go.
Yeah, it's cheapest. It's the cheapest overall, I would
Yeah.
say, when you do everything on bulk. But if you can see that trend of electric cars coming, there may only have a few electric cars in your Strata now, but what we'll probably find in 20 years, everyone's either going to be considering or a significant number of people will have electric cars. And so it will affect the way you buy your place, sell your place, rent your place, and the government incentives for electrification of transportation. So it's important to think about it as a whole. Next slide, please. Oh, next slide, if possible. Oh, thanks. This is an overcomplicated table. I agree. I got feedback from the fellas there, but really, I just want to say there's some terminology that you're going to hear. Level 1 charger, level 2 charger, managed charger, unmanaged charger. In the opinion for Lux Electric and Hedgehog, when we're installing charging infrastructure, we are dealing with only what's called a level 2 charger, which allows your car to be charged in a single night or in just a few hours. And managed allows many chargers to be on the same line together and allows you to have more chargers on one line than would normally be allowed. So you're going to hear us when we talk about charging infrastructure, we're talking about level 2 chargers and managed. The level 1 chargers, someone had a question about plugging in 120 volts. That's a level 1 charger. We're not going to talk about that. Those, as you've seen with extension cords running all over the place, become impractical very quickly. Next slide. Okay, so this is where Rico, Chris, and I are going to spend the bulk of our time talking to you about, and it's really the process in which you want to consider on how to get your infrastructure upgraded to support as many people as possible, if not everyone. So the first thing is you want to decide what you want. So I can see from some of the questions, some people want to just have 1 or 2 charging stations in. And as I said, there's nothing wrong with that, but we recommend going bigger than that to think longer term, but know what you want before you start. So if you want that, that's a different question than if you want charging stations throughout your facility. The next is really, it's a mix between getting a grant and understanding what the capacity is electrically of your facility. So some of you may feel that you don't have enough electrical capacity in your system, or you are not sure. So there's a way to do that. And we do something called an EV ready plan, which is a feasibility study. Chris and Rico, what do you guys have comments on that? The EV ready plan?
So the EV ready plan is the plan where all of the units, all of the units in the condo or strata each have one charger. And that is the one that basically where you get all the best rebates from. And looking to the future is the best way to go, especially because by 2040 in Canada, all vehicles sold will be of the electric kind. So that's definitely the way to go.
Yeah, and also thanks, Chris. And also what it allows you to do is to really see what your capacity is, which brings us to the next question is select a charging provider. Rico, Chris, and I have no affiliation with charging companies of any kind. I'm going to use a charging company as an example, but we don't care if you use them or not. So the two big ones that we've been familiar with is one called ChargePoint and one called Flow. And the reason I'm using those names is what they do is they have Strata specific systems that allow the charging and the billing to be managed at a Strata level. What they also allow for is, say you have, say you only have a service that allows for 30 amps, which is one charging station. Well, Flow allows you to plug in 4 there because then it'll share the power between them. So if there's 1 car, it gets all the charge. If there's 4 cars, it divides it by 4. So it allows you to get 4 times the capacity of an original one. So lots of these charging providers have these systems that allow it to be centrally billed and then billed back using, you can use your phone. One of them has a fob that you just beep yourself in. So it can be a private station or it can be a communal station. Either way it'll work. And then you can have power sharing, and that will work as well. Is that what you guys are seeing as well, Rico?
I think those are the two main ones that we are asked to provide quotes on is the Flow definitely and the ChargePoint. There are other ones on the market, but I think their technology and software aren't as sophisticated and as developed. But I do agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we're finding as well.
Yeah.
And so once you've selected your charger and you've got your EV plan, like a feasibility that it's possible to have a charging system installed to what you want, then you need really, this is where the people like me come in and work with Rico to do a detailed design and get you some numbers, some quoting. So the EV ready plan lets you get some broad numbers, but really the detailed design, the nuts and bolts of it are where the quoting and the pricing and how it's all going to come together come in. And then you can get us to provide that design for you. And then that allows you to get your quotes and then build what we call a backbone so that you can build all the wires to all the stalls. So ready for if and when that unit holder wants a charging station, they can add it at their leisure. But the structure is there ready for them to do it if they want it. Is that about cover it, Rico and Chris?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. And that's really it, but it's a process. It's not like if you call us and you say, what should I do? We're going to say, okay, we need your bills. We need your electrical drawings. We have to come do a site visit. There's a handful of things have to do because it is a lot of electricity when everyone wants to get their car charged at the same time.
Michael, can I just jump in here? I just want to maybe frame it a little bit, if that's okay.
Of course.
Okay, so I think the in Strata corporations is going to be like 3 different paths to take. One is if you have a townhome project and you can put it on the homeowner's meter, meaning they can park out front in their garage or they can park underneath their townhome and they can hook it onto their home meter. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. They got to get a charger. They're going to have to sign an indemnity agreement. That's pretty simple. A stopgap that some clients are doing is we're going to put some charging in visitor parking, right? And so the Strata is going to pay for it, or we're going to do a card reader tap or something. And what we're saying is that's a good stopover for the short term. But because, like the city of Vancouver said, over half of all kilometers traveled in 8 years is going to be non-fossil fuel in Vancouver, so it's happening really quickly. And so what we're kind of the other option is how do we build that infrastructure without it costing a Strata a fortune to be able to have chargers installed? And you were telling me on the side that one of them is they might already have the capacity. It's just not optimized because it's overbuilt. So that's good news for us, because if we don't have to do a big upgrade, then that could save us a lot. But you need an engineer to look at that. And then the other thing is whatever power you have, using technology, you might be able to get a smart chargers, which would allow charging on all lots, but not have to have a big significant backbone behind it, which is expensive. Is that a good summary so far?
Sean, you're good at this.
Yeah.
It's like
I
I've done
think
this
so.
before. Okay, anyway, I just wanted to clarify and just kind of maybe frame it in Strata Council members' thinking.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. Like you could do a stopgap and then get yourself to the bigger one. And there are right now a bunch of incentives out there. We just did one. Rico, Chris, and I are working on one right now where there's a incentive. They get $80,000 to do, and they have, Rico, how many is it? 140 stalls?
I think, yeah, around 140. Yeah, it's a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry,
so-
what was the total bill? 80 sounds good unless it's 8 million.
Well, okay, so the backbone is, the backbone is about 150.
Yeah, maybe,
Oh,
sure.
Mhm.
Yeah. I
That's
think,
like
yeah,
almost
around
half. Well, it's more than half.
It's a lot of money, and it's and then the plan that this Strata agreed to, and every Strata is of course different, is they agreed that they're going to take that out of contingency. They just had their AGM, and the 80 is paid for by the government, and then the remainder, which I can't remember what that divides into, but it's not much per unit. They're going to pay the rest off with that. And then what that leaves them with is the electrical infrastructure is all over the place. And then as each unit holder wants an EV charger, they pay for that themselves and install it. And so EV chargers cost between $400 and $3,000. Is that about right, Rico?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's it for that slide. Next slide. And that's it. And we're moving on to our next presenter. Sean, please introduce Lisa.
Okay, so just before we get there, Jim, is there any like question that's come up multiple times by people, or these questions that we're going to answer at the end? Because Lisa's got a whole bunch of extra stuff that's about to cause a whole bunch of questions.
I would make an observation. I think some people are spending more time typing questions than waiting to hear the answers, because most of the questions that have been asked have been answered during the presentation. So well done, Michael and Rico. One of the interesting questions was, is there any liability to the Strata under insurance? And maybe that's better for an insurance person, but they're just questioning, they're going ahead and installing a charger, you're paying for it. How do we involve the Strata? So that's one question. Many questions on ballpark prices for doing the plan of the, what's the Strata going to look at as an investment to get up and to a point where they can make some decisions. And the other was, how did they apply for the grants? Is it done by the Strata? Is it done by the contractor? So those are the three hot buttons. There's many more, but I'll just remind everybody that we will get you the answers. If it's not tonight, you will get the answer. But I think I'm up to about 80 questions. And so if we try and answer each one of those individually, we'll be going home at midnight. And that's not cool. So,
Okay,
so
so
can we
thanks,
touch
Jim.
on that? Some ideas of the cost, I think, was the big hot one. And how do you apply for the grants?
I can just, some of the costs that we're familiar with the recent installation is, once again, I'm going to use a supplier that I have no affiliation with, but Flow, just broad numbers, is approximately, you have a Flow charging system that has like an FOB, use your phone or a little card to beep yourself in. and it does power sharing. I think per charger, Rico, they're like $1,500, $2,000.
Well, approximately 1,500, yeah.
Yeah, and then they have to install this like communication stuff that goes up to the internet so you can view accounts. So the Strata can view counts on the phones and stuff like that. And each user pays a $10 service fee for that. And then on top of that, the electrical usage, which is by time of use, I think, is a agreement on the billing is through the Strata, and then it's sent to the Strata as a whole, and then as an aggregate, but it's billed out by each person, and each Strata user is billed individually for their usage. But it's really a service fee, which is about 150 a year. The charger, which is about, let's call it 2,000, and then I guess that's it. And then the installation, which we were talking about for this one, that was 140 parking stalls, is that's not unit, that's 140 units, but 140 parking stalls. So everyone gets access to one charging station. Port would be about 150 grand. That's 2 levels.
Yeah, it was 2 levels.
Yeah.
Okay.
So another,
Sorry, Jim. Yeah, you go. I was going to ask is how much does an engineer cost? Like how much, like a service like yourself, Michael, what could we expect?
It depends. It depends on the size, and I'm just throwing out numbers. We just have to assess where you're at, but it's between 5,000 and 15,000.
Okay.
So one question, gentlemen, I know the name. And the question is, why not address the cost of electricity the way that natural gas is? 1 meter for the building, and the Strata pays a monthly bill, and then recovers it from the owners.
Oh, that's a great question. And the problem is that you can, but you don't know who's using it. Like what gas is that everyone has those, like in our townhome, we had gas fireplaces, and then everyone uses about the same amount. So we just assumed everyone pays sort of divide by however many units there were, and it more or less worked out. With cars, you're going to have people at the beginning, early adopters are going to have the electric cars, and then who's going to pay that bill? And so I put a meter right on my own electric car and used it anyway. I've used it extensively. It's about $30 a month in electricity. So if you had 100 cars, it would be $300 a month. Like $3,000 a month for those cars.
Okay. Another one, and this may fall more into Lisa's bailiwick, so if we can't answer it now, we will later. But the Strata in New Westminster has been told they can't act like an electric utility and bill individual owner for their hydro usage in the parkade. So what are the legal implications regarding installing EV chargers and having owner pay for usage? I think Sean knows the answer to that with respect to the Strata Property Act.
Yeah, I will talk a little bit about that in my presentation.
Okay, good news.
Okay, Jim, is there any big highlight ones? Because I think Lisa might answer a bunch of these questions.
Yeah, I totally agree. And as I say, they're all focusing around the money. So we'll get to that. I did want to acknowledge as we're moving forward that we actually have people online tonight again from Saskatchewan and our chapter in Saskatchewan. So it's wonderful to see a broad range of people from across BC and across Canada online. And so thank you for that. So we should perhaps move on then.
Sounds good. Lisa, over to you.
All right, so my plan is to discuss some of the high-level considerations around the legal side of electric vehicles. I think Michael did a great job talking about some of the practical steps to take. I would like to start maybe step 0 from the Strata Corporation context. Maybe, when you're assessing the needs of your building, polls, town hall meetings, things like that, really talk to the owners and find out what their desires are at the current time and what they're going to be. Because as you'll see, while we can do some things to allocate the ongoing operating costs of the installation of the EV chargers and also certain costs to individuals, if you do need those large infrastructure upgrades, it's probably going to have to be a common cost, and you're going to have to get that approved by a threshold of owners. So doing that work up front to engage people, educate people, show them where the trends are going, and get that buy-in from the beginning can either make it a lot smoother along the way or make you realize early on that it's not worth it. Maybe step 0.5, I know these folks talked about sort of the cost of getting an engineer and doing an assessment to see what the existing capacity of your building is at. You may also want to think about legal fees. And so one thing that we see is startup corporations who are thinking about these types of things, maybe don't have a mandate yet, putting sort of a professional fee line item in their annual budget so they can get some initial legal advice on this as well. It's going to depend a lot. Again, Shannon was talking about different arrangements within the strata. Is it straightforward? Is it going to require a lot of work? It may be as simple as getting a special alteration agreement done, or a cookie cutter bylaw, maybe $2,000 in legal fees. If you've got a large building, complicated parking leases, a number of agreements, and you need to concern yourself whether you are a utility, as was foreshadowed, that it might be $5,000 in legal fees, upward from there, drafting resolutions, things like that. So something to keep in mind when you get started. And then from there, you're going to work with your contractors to determine sort of the best physical location where things would be going. And then we move on to how we're going to pay for it and how we're going to manage use. So next slide. So obviously this is going to come back to a few different factors. The one that I want to talk about from a legal perspective is how is parking structured at your strata corporation. So you're obviously going to want to make a determination of, are there 2 or 3 people who are going to be doing this, or are you going to be making your strata EV ready? Which again, as a lawyer, we would obviously recommend sort of thinking about this on a large future planning scale from a cost-effective perspective as well, rather than kind of doing it patchwork along the way. And one of the things I can say about that too is that strata corporations, in terms of getting in trouble with the CRT and adhering to their duties of fairness and things like that, if you make exceptions for certain people or arrangements for certain people, you run the risk of getting accused of not having the optics or the actual fairness towards owners, and you can end up getting yourself in trouble. So having a sort of patchwork solution ad hoc along the way, even though it usually happens with the best of intentions and trying to keep costs down, can lead you into legal trouble. So that's one reason to sort of do it as a unified policy, get input, and move forward from that perspective. But that's obviously going to, if you only have a few folks that want to take advantage of it, obviously that's probably not the right path for you. And looking at subsidies and figuring out, whether you want to address short-term needs or long-term needs down the line. But the biggest one I want to talk about is the type of parking structure that you've got at your strata corporation. So if you look at the next slide, there's really 3 or 4, depending on how you look at it, and different ways that parking operates in strata corporations. The first is the designation of limited common property to each owner. And this is more common in a townhouse or a smaller strata. And this is actually done on the strata plan or by 3/4 resolution of the strata after the fact. And so that designation, once the parking stall is designated as limited common property to your strata lot, will flow at law with that strata lot. And so there's really not an option to juggle parking. So if you own that parking stall, whether or not you're using your EV charger, the strata really doesn't have a mechanism to allow other people to use that charger even if you don't need it. And it starts to look more of like a, installing a deck or something like that that's specific to your unit. Whereas it's probably more common in a larger strata to have your parking just be designated as general common property. And this is, of course, you can find out on your strata plan. You can ask your strata manager for that. You can see whether each parking stall is allocated by way of limited common property or whether it's a large, usually a chunk that says C with a circle around it. You have common property parking. And sometimes that's genuine common property parking, like would be the case with visitor stalls, where it's just allocated by the Strata Corporation. And then you can, by bylaw, sort of take control of what that common property looks like. But more likely, it's probably subject to a parking lease or a license that was maybe registered at land titles, maybe not registered at land titles, but entered into by the owner developer before any of the strata lots were sold. So this is by far the most common recently. And so the owner developer will enter into a lease with usually just a shell corporation, and then that lease will be subleased or assigned to you as an owner. So because that lease pre-existed the deposit of the strata plan, and this is getting super technical, so I apologize, but it actually sort of governs the land in a way that makes it not as flexible for the strata corporation to administer. So if you've got these parking leases, owners will have a copy of that assignment. And even if the strata corporation is now tasked with administrating those leases, that lease or license will often set out terms of how parking swapping will work. So again, if you're looking at, rather than making the whole strata EV ready and just allocating, having certain parking stalls for owners who want them become EV enabled and then having them swap according to use, the terms of that lease or license may or may not allow the strata corporation to do that easily. I know I work with a lot of developers. About 10 years ago, they started turning their mind to the issue of disabled parking and making sure that that was something that the strata could allocate according to need. And more recently, they've been looking at electric vehicles, but this may or may not be something that's contemplated. If it's not contemplated, there's not really a good way for the Strata Corporation to make somebody who's not using their EV charger because they bought it from somebody else who had one and make them swap with someone who actually needs it. So that'll be a consideration of what approach you take. And the last type is, sometimes parking stalls are part of the strata lot. This is super rare. In this case, it's like an even more simple, simple legal fix to get them to install it. It doesn't make the technical part any easier, but it does make the legal part easier. So next slide. Right, so this is the first one. So if parking is LCP, there's, it's going to make it more of an owner-driven alteration because you won't have any swapping. And there's already a mechanism under the Strata Property Act to allocate operating costs to people who have the use of common property that's exclusively designated for them in this manner. So there's actually a Strata Property Regulation, and that's on the next slide, that would allow you to allocate those costs to whoever has use of it. So in the event that you have perhaps, 5 owners or 7 owners or something like that who all want to make the installation, you could theoretically allocate the cost as a strata corporation to those owners by way of the regulation, even if you don't have a specific bylaw. And it's still the strata corporation as the client, so you don't have a utility problem. So this could be a way to approach it. Even if you have a way to deal with the cost in this manner, you still want owners to apply to council for permission to alter common property. And you probably want to make a formal policy, even if you don't codify it in a bylaw, you'll want to make a formal policy for what is going to be required for that approval. So if it's an owner-driven alteration, and this comes back to consistency of the Strata Corporation to make sure that your bylaws and rules and decisions continue to be enforceable because they're fair for everybody, but also in terms of liability. So my feeling, I'm not a Strata insurance person, but my feeling is that if the insurance broker is advised that this process is happening, and the Strata takes reasonable steps to make sure that owners are going to be using their chargers appropriately, and the Strata has a mechanism for actually charging back to any owners who misuse their, or if they're getting their own contractors to install, which is not necessarily recommended, but if that sort of thing is happening, if there's a way for them to indemnify the Strata Corporation for that, I think that's going to help a lot for insurance. So we would consider, or we would recommend having a policy for who gets approved, what the standards are going to be. And, if owners are plugging into a regular parking outlet level 1 charger, maybe they don't need to do anything rigorous. If they're going to be, obviously installing like a level 2 charger or something like that, and tapping into the Strata Corporation's power grid in a more invasive manner, there'll probably be a more rigorous set of steps that they would need to take. It might be a matter of, asking to see the qualifications of anybody who's going to be doing that work, et cetera, and having a standard user agreement or alteration agreement is also really helpful. So despite the fact that we can do some things in order to allocate the costs, having an agreement that clearly lays it out and allowing the Strata Corporation to collect it in that manner is going to be a lot more convenient and less unpopular, perhaps, than having people say, oh, well, I didn't realize you could charge this back to me in this way. Setting it all out in agreement, it's a good idea to have a standard one. And then if you are in the second category there of common property parking, like I said, if you don't have, and this would apply to visitor stalls, if you want to add specific EV spots, you've got extra visitor space, and you want to make some stalls that you could, owners could pay to use on a need basis and then swap. You could pass a bylaw to organize that. And certainly if you have those public chargers that you're going to be putting on common property, and again, this helps from a liability perspective, you would want to have some bylaws or rules set out about length of use, who can use it, and you may want to have, a fob-based system, like Michael was talking about, where you could then, make sure that owners are using it appropriately. So if you don't have a lease or license, you're probably going to need a bylaw to deal with it. If there is a lease or license in place, you may or may not be restricted from having swapping at all. If you're not, then you can, again, you could pass a bylaw or at least have a policy about how the Strata Corporation is going to take requests for swapping, how they're going to evaluate need. Do you need to send a picture of your EV sticker or whatever it is to justify that you need to stall? What if your car is in the shop? All these considerations, if you think about it in advance, will save you a lot of headache in the future. And if you don't have a swapping mechanism and you're going to have owners constantly, because it's not just if we put in 6 or 7, we can swap people who need them in and out for the next 5 or 10 years. If you know that it's going to be a constant barrage of requests as these things become more and more popular, you might want to look at making the Strata EV enabled for everyone. And once again, yeah, this is perfect. So once again, If you're going to do common property, you'll want some kind of user agreement. It's not exactly an alteration agreement if they're not the ones that are doing it, but if they are going to be using a stall that the Strata has made EV enabled, you will want them to confirm that they're going to comply with all applicable laws, bylaws, rules, potentially indemnify the Strata for any loss or damages from misuse of those stalls. This is an interesting one, not let others use the stall without permission. I'm sure property managers here can attest to some instances of that. And then if they're allowing owners to install their own equipment, are they required to uninstall it when they no longer are using the stall or when they sell? So dealing with these things in advance, of course, will save you a lot of headache down the line. And then if you're parking as part of the Strata lot, then it's a very straightforward alteration agreement. Very easy for owners to pay for their own costs, and you'll just want to deal with it the way that you would sort of a more standard alteration. Okay, so one other consideration that always comes up when you're making a change to common property. So if you're LCP, CP, parking lease, this is going to apply to you. If changes are going to be made to common property, you may want to consider and may want to get some legal advice on whether you need a Section 71 resolution, a 3/4 vote of all the owners approving a significant change to the use or appearance of common property. So very case-by-case basis, but generally speaking, we have at least one helpful CRT decision. An owner basically installed a regular 110 volt outlet to his parking stall and plugged it in. I think somebody was saying it takes about 3 days to charge your car that way, but he made that request to council. Council approved it, did not go to 3/4 vote of the owners. Somebody complained and asked him to reverse all of the work that he had done. And the CRT said, well, many people at the Strata already have a regular parking or a regular electrical outlet. It doesn't affect their insurance. There's no evidence that it was going to be a liability issue. And so they said, no, this is really not a significant change. If it's going to be affecting in a more significant way the wiring at the Strata, the large infrastructure changes we talked about, there might be a different answer. So this will be something you want to look at. Does it need to go to all the owners? If you're going to be funding it, you're going to already be probably asking the owners for money. So good idea to get that approval at the same time rather than ending up arguing your case with the CRT. But if it's just an owner plugging into an outlet or something like of that nature, it's not going to require that. Anything stronger, I would recommend that you probably get a resolution. Next slide. So funding the original installation. The legislative regime for whether or not a Strata corporation can be considered a utility by the BC Utilities Commission, which would then require them to be going through a regulatory process, is changing. So my understanding is the recommendation, an order has been made that Stratas are exempt as long as they're just passing along the costs and they're not trying to, make a profit. But you would definitely, if you're in one of the situations where you've got an electric meter for the Strata Corporation is getting billed by BC Hydro, and then you're looking to install sub-meters and recover the costs, you'll definitely want to talk to a Strata lawyer first and make sure you've done everything you need to do. My understanding is that there's exemptions available. So even if you are caught, if you take that step and you apply, you can be exempted from the regime. But you might just have to do a few other steps first so you don't get caught in that situation. And you can, you might be able to get a little bit creative with how your billing and utility user fees are allocated to make sure that you're not running afoul of that legislation. But that's what I will say about that. And we talked about if you've got LCP, you could pass a special levy affecting only those units. Fortunately, that's not true for the contingency reserve fund. It's one of the places where the strata regime actually distinguishes between special levies and CRF expenditures. So if you're going to be doing anything from CRF, it does need to go be borne by all of the owners by unit entitlement. Interesting. But if you are looking at the actual operating costs, we're into user fees. So they are permitted under the Strata Property Act. Yes, that's the next slide. So they are permitted under the Strata Property Act as a different way to allocate expenses. The general rule, of course, under the Act is that everything is by unit entitlement unless they're changed by unanimous resolution, or there's another authorized way under the Act to deal with it. So user fees exist. They must be passed by way of a bylaw or a ratified rule. So Strata Council can pass rules, but they need to be ratified at the next annual or special general meeting. So you will definitely have to get the owners to sign off on a user fee. You can't just stick it in that user agreement, which would be great. And there's some other limitations to them. They must be reasonable and they must have some kind of justifiable basis. And the courts in the CRT have had lots of things to say about whether certain types of user fees are reasonable. But I will talk about a few that seem to be okay. And I'll just mention these are, again, looking at recovering the Strata Corporation's costs of operating rather than the cost of initial installation. So generally speaking, the cost of the original installation and modifications to the infrastructure are going to be borne by all of the owners by special levy or contingency reserve. This is for the ongoing costs of the strata. So one of them is direct metering. So this is actually based on power consumption. So there's different types of meters, and I think Michael touched on this as well. Some of them are pretty smart, so they can actually, you can, as a user, be issued a fob. You can install an app on your phone. You can just tap it, and then you, at the end of the month, the strata will receive some kind of report of who's used what, and that would form the basis for a reasonable user fee. Another option, if that sounds expensive or cumbersome, could be an estimate using annual mileage. So, and I think, if the difference between, driving your car extensively and charging for long hours and short hours is really not enough to justify the extra overhead and possibly, administration that goes into it, you could use sort of a quick and dirty estimation method. Look at the user, look at the vehicle they have, look at how many kilometers they've put on them last year, and then allocate it that way. But again, you need to have this in a bylaw or a rule. You can't just look at your bill at the end of the year and allocate it like this. It does have to be something that people are aware of in advance. And the third option is sort of another fair formula. And so it could just be as simple as dividing by the number of users. Again, this has to be authorized in advance. So that is all I have.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm going to just provide a summary of what we've talked about and what each Strata Council should look at doing so that they've got next steps. And we can summarize this, and then we're going to answer some questions. So the first thing is there's no easy answer, right? And that's because each Strata Corporation is very different. And so there's two pieces to that. There's the infrastructure, what you have for electrical. Are you a townhome? Are you a big tower? Are you newer and you already have some infrastructure? So everyone's different. And then the legal end of it is it LCP? Is it common property? And are we in an area where it's going to be harder to implement? there's solutions to both. There's solutions to great infrastructure or poor infrastructure. There's solutions to the different legal setup that each Strata corporation has. So the first thing you need to do as a Strata council member is figure out what the demand is, right? So we manage a lovely property called Radius, and the Tesla dealership is in the ground floor. I'm going to bet there's a lot more electric car needs in that building than there are going to be in other buildings. And so you really need to engage the ownership and find out what the appetite is. I saw a question that said, how are we going to get owners to approve a 3/4 vote? You're right. You might not, right? If there isn't a need for it and there isn't a huge desire, that you're dealing with a different kettle of fish than somebody where they're all really gung-ho on electric cars. We know electric cars are coming, they're already here, but they're going to become the majority over the next 10 years. We're just talking about getting ready for them. So the first thing we got to do is figure out if there's an appetite with the owners. And then you can react accordingly. Very little appetite. Maybe you just want some charging in the visitor parking. Fairly simple to proceed with. Very big appetite. You know, we really, all the owners want to put in electric car charging because they think it's going to help their property value and they want to get a Tesla. And so you need to figure out what the demand is. Then you can easily talk to an electrician and they can have a quick run through your building and they can say, yeah, this is not going to be that hard. Or, oof, this is going to be a big lift. Based on what the Strata is looking for, and you Strata council members can get a feel for the ownership. So then you're going to have the electrician's going to give you the quick overview. You're going to have to go get some money from the owners. You're going to have to go get some money because you're going to probably need an engineer or an electrician with a big, deep knowledge, but someone you know, like Michael is probably what you're going to need because they can actually save you money by finding you power in the building. And then you're going to need someone like Lisa, and you're going to need a lawyer to help out with the legal. Like, how are we going to structure this legally to recover the costs, or do we recover the costs, or is there going to be an indemnity agreement? What's the process? And so, you know, from a budget point of view, you're probably going to be anywhere between $8,000 and $15,000. So that's the third step. First step is find out what the owners want, right? Talk to an electrician. And then if there's an appetite for it, you're going to have to raise some money and you're going to have to bring in the professionals, and the professionals are going to help get you on the direction of getting a full quote. So how much is this going to do? And at that time, you can assess the rebates, because the rebates change all the time. The government is constantly changing the rebates. And I would assume in the long run, the rebates are going to go down slowly as it becomes the dominant area, but maybe not. And so then at that time, you can assess rebates, total cost, legal structure. Then you can take it to the ownership. You're going to have a vote, maybe a levy, maybe some CRF funds. And then after that, you can do the installation and actual implementation. So it's quite a few steps. It's not easy. You know, if your Strata did say, we want to do a significant upgrade in installation, it's going to take some time. And so I think we can all start reaching out to the ownership at general meetings, seeing people in the elevator or in the parkade, and ask them about what their idea on EV charging is and if they're interested in it. And then that's the first step. And then we can start moving through the rest of it. So Lisa, that's a decent summary?
Totally. Yes.
Okay.
And I just wanted to clarify, I realized I didn't make this clear. If you can get an individual to purchase their own sort of like charging unit, like the thing that plugs into the wall, that cost can be, you know, offloaded to an owner that's making an alteration to common property. I guess what I'm talking about having the Strata pay for communally would be the actual changes to the underlying power infrastructure. Just wanted to make sure.
Right. Yeah, because electric charge, you can charge them 110. I think the most desire is the 240. And if you have a lot of 240 cars, that's a lot of power needs, and how do you handle that for sure. Okay, so with that, we're going to go to Jim, who's going to call out some questions, and then maybe we can have our expert panel here answer them.
Thanks very much. Again, a lot of the questions were actually covered during the webinar, and some of them are really beyond the scope of this presentation. When you're asking things like the city bylaws with respect to blocking driveway aisles, that's really not what this webinar is aimed at. So apologies if you don't hear your question come up. I'm up to over 70 questions, so we're not going to get to all 70. So one of the quick ones, though, people are asking, can we get a transcript of the meeting? You're actually going to be sent a link to see this whole presentation on video. So if you missed something, it'll be there, all the contact information, etc. One of the points was about fairness, and that is, if you only can get 8 charging stations in a building, you've got 150 parking stalls, how do you treat people fairly? Well, that becomes a Strata Council decision, how to move that forward. There's a question about, can a Strata deny a request? So maybe that's for Lisa, but you have an owner who bought a unit, there's no EV charging in there, he wants to put one in, you write to council and say, I'm willing to pay for an EV charging station. Can council deny that request?
So the Strata Council has a duty to act reasonably. And this is, I think that's a later question too, asking, is there a duty to accommodate? So it's not like in the case of, a human rights complaint or something like that, where there's a duty on the Strata to accommodate that request. But the Strata Council's duty is to act reasonably. So they would be, required to hear the owner out, give them a written decision, all of those parts of the act that apply to, owners interacting with the council. They would do that, and you'd have to give reasons for that decision. So I would think that, if there's an existing outlet and there's no, there's not going to be a negative effect on other owners, they may have right to complain if the strategist says, no, we don't want to look into this. or if, and this is what I was talking about with the duty of fairness, if they've allowed somebody else to do something similar and now they're denying you, that might get into trouble. But, if you look into it and you find out that, there's already so many owners using the grid that it's going to put everybody in a situation that's unfavorable, or if it's going to require significant cost to the Strata Corporation to make the upgrades required for the owner to have that charger purchased, then you would likely be in a position to say no, I would say.
Okay, thank you. This is a question for Sean. I could answer it because I know the answer from a management company is, Sean, will management company such as FSR charge a surcharge for allocating electric consumption by unit? Seems like a lot of work for the accounting department.
So actually, that's a really good point. I don't know if it was my team, if that's a prep question or something. But yeah, that came up is when this panel was talking and getting ready for this, is like, whew, sounds like a lift for the management company all of a sudden to have to apply all this. So I don't have an answer for you right now. I know we do it for some clients right now as we're experimenting and learning, but we'll have to look into it in the future.
Yeah, and if I can, again, I'm a property manager as well, and wear different hats. That it's all how you as a council interact and work with your management company. If you've got a positive relationship, everybody pulling in the same direction, you'll find management companies are a little easier to get along with and aren't looking after every nickel and dime. But if you're difficult to get along with, then this would be a totally fair thing to charge for. And you may see that the management company coming and saying, you're paying everybody else, where's our share? So that's just an editorial comment on behalf of property managers. And Sean, you owe me a beer for that. And so this is a more technical question. Is it possible for older condo to economically install individual outlets for each unit and have them separately metered? Is that possible? So let's say you've got a garage, you've got an electrical, let's say a smaller building, so your electrical rooms in the parking level with all the meters. Can you run power so that it just gets added onto the homeowner's meter?
Economically, it's not economic. It becomes quite expensive. And then the other problem is, because of the code requirements and how chargers use electricity, you would use up your the electricity that you have available very quickly. That would be my short answer.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point to remember is it's not a infinite amount of power coming into your building.
Yeah.
You know, there is like a hose, you can only tap off so many extensions on it before.
If you were talking like less than 10, you could do it. But it would probably become like somewhere in the $4,000 to $6,000 range for every single charger that was installed, because you would have to run electricity from the electrical panel to that person's unit. And then it would also depend on how far that unit is from, sorry, that parking stall is from the electrical panel. So there's a lot of moving parts. And then you could have to be coring and scanning. And so it can become quite expensive to do it that way.
Better to do it in groups. That's
Yeah.
the key is there's efficiency in numbers.
Okay. Again, we've now reached the end of our time for this. There's enough questions to go on. A lot of them are very similar though. It's costing of what it's going to cost for a charging station level 1. One owner asked, why are you, in a sense, only focused on level 2 chargers and not level 1?
I can answer that. I used to have a level 1 charger. I bought myself a Tesla. It took 3 days to charge. I bought a level 2 charger. It took 4 hours. If you want 3 days to charge your car, a level 1 will work, but I got to go to work the next day. Or say you have a weekend, say you say you can handle it, you don't drive very far, and then on Friday you have to drive out of town. You won't make it.
So maybe this is just a question for Michael and Rico. What are you installing? Like, what are you seeing? Are you seeing 110s go in, or is it all level 2?
Nobody asked us to install a level 1 charger. If they're using a level 1 charger, they already have a receptacle.
Okay.
Yeah, so when you buy an electric car, you usually get a level 1 charger in the trunk. Like it comes with one. So you don't even need us. You just string it out the
Plug
back.
and play.
Plug it in.
Yeah.
Plug it in the nearest plug. Hopefully it works.
Yeah, I think that the challenge is that the Strata corporations, and a lot of them have a parkade, and then they have a 110 outlet, but that's really designed for like vacuuming out your car. And so the outlets are only on one breaker. So they probably only have like 30 amps. I'm talking like electricians. What's a normal 110 plug got?
15 amps.
15 amps. And so
Yeah.
if you get like 5 cars charging on it,
No,
it's
you
not
can
gonna
only
be
have
able to-
one.
I think we've
Okay.
dealt with a couple of those issues.
The biggest issue that we have with level 1 chargers is when you're in a condo, you can only have one car charging at a time on that circuit. So in order for you to have a dedicated level 1 charger, it would cost you almost the same amount of money to have a level 2 charger installed. So you might as well go with a level 2 and have way faster charging.
Okay,
Can you
that's
even buy a level 1 charger? Like if you went, like, I don't know if anyone will sell you one. I mean, it comes with the car, but that's about it, I think.
Okay,
It's very
I think
impractical.
I think we answered that one.
Yeah.
Level 2, you can do level 1, but level 2 is what everybody's doing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it sounds like if you have a townhouse and you have your own circuit and stuff, then it's probably not that that significant of a legal problem, anyways.
Yeah, you're totally right.
So can we sort of look to the future? We've said that by 2040, if you're going to buy a new car, it's going to be electric. I guess the question is, should a condominium strata now be saying, look, it's silly for us to install and do all this work and spend all this money to, let's say, only have 20% of the parkade able to have a parking or electric vehicle. Would you recommend that they sort of look to the future and put the infrastructure in at the beginning, or what's the best way to proceed?
I would say costs are always going up. So what costs $100,000 now might cost you $250,000 in 20 years.
I think it's important as well that these BC Hydro rebates aren't going to be around forever. I mean, it's something that's here now. So, I mean, this is the time to act on it because they will expire like everything else, right?
Yeah,
And also the value of properties will increase if you have it. It gives people options. I mean,
if you're
you know.
renting or selling, I think the issue is gonna come in, if you're renting or selling, the first thing people are gonna start asking, it may not be now, but guaranteed, they're gonna say, do I have a charging station? Right, it'll be a selling feature, it'll be a renting feature. So right now, it may increase the value of your property. In 5-10 years, it may be mandatory. You won't be able to sell your place without a charging station. They won't, no one will come.
Another question, have any buildings or stratas had a DC, I assume that direct current, fast chargers installed?
Not through us.
Yeah,
I haven't seen any.
the DC fast chargers are massive. So at the time of the building construction, it might be able to be designed in, but other than that, you know, for example, a regular level 2 charger uses 10 kilowatts. Don't need to know what a kilowatt is, but 10 kilowatts. The superchargers use 300. So they're 30 times the capacity. I guess it'd be like having 30 charging stations all running at the same time at full. It'd be a major upgrade.
So I'm just going to wrap up because some people I'm sure need to sign off, and appreciate so many have stayed online. Really appreciate the participation. Our next seminar is in August, and it will be on virtual meetings, which we've been living with for a year and a half now. And a lot of us in the industry are convinced this is the best way to proceed moving forward with council meetings and general meetings. Generally, we're finding attendance at general meeting to be higher on a virtual meeting in many cases than an in-person meeting. So there's many positives. We know there's some negatives as well, but we'll have a great panel again to speak to those concerns and issues. I'd like again to thank the sponsors for making this possible. You know, how good is it when it's free? And we really appreciate them all stepping up. So that was Access Law Group, BFL Canada, Access Law, specialist in strata law, along with our friend Lisa. BFL is a strata insurance, First Service Residential, large strata management company, a national company, North American company, pardon me. And pleased to have Sean as our host tonight and appreciate all his good work. Lux Electric, that Rico and team for all their great work, and Power Strata, which is a software company specializing in strata documents and communications, and we appreciate all their support. I will again say that the questions, we will do our best to get the answers we can. I know somewhere on insurance, which wasn't covered here, but we'll do our best to get this out to you. Everybody will be sent a link to the virtual presentation that we just saw. I did have a question, would there be a transcript? No, we're relying on volunteers. So we can't possibly, I think at this point, ask our volunteers to sit down and type out all this information. So our apology for that. Again, it will be available. So if somebody on your strata wants to do that, that'd be awesome, but we can't offer that. So with that, again, thanks to Sean and our presenters, a fabulous job. Some people behind the scenes who did all the work to make this happen, and relying on technology, and hope to see you soon. Stay safe, and thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye now. Thank you.